Our lesson today is to be able to classify angles as complementary or supplementary, and to be able to use the characteristics of each type of angle to find the missing measures of either an angle's complement or an angle's supplement. For the vocabulary today, two angles are complementary when the sum of their angles is 90 degrees. Right, if we take a look here, 30 plus 60 is 90, so those two angles are complementary. Here we see the right angle symbol, and we see angles 1 and 2. Take that right angle symbol and split it into two angles, right? So we know that the sum of those two angles also has to be 90 degrees, so they are each, or those angles are complementary angles as well. Two angles are supplementary when the sum of their angles is 180 degrees. So if you have an angle that measures 135 degrees and an angle that measures 45 degrees, 135 plus 45 is equal to 180 degrees. All right, but this is this next one is the type of angle that we're going to use a lot of, right? We have a straight angle here, right? And that straight angle is split into two angles, right? Angle 3 and angle 4. We know that a straight angle measures 180 degrees, so if we take a straight angle that measures 180 and split that straight angle into two angles, those two angles would have to be supplementary because those two angles would have to have a sum of the 180 degrees. Okay? So let's take a look at our first examples. Tell whether the angles are complementary or supplementary or neither. Well, 70 plus 110 is equal to 180, so 180 means that those angles would be supplementary. Alright, let's take a look at our next example. We have 41 degrees plus 49 degrees. 41 plus 49 equals 90, so those angles are complementary. Alright, and then this last example here, we have an angle that measures 128 and an angle that measures 62. 128 plus 62 is 190. So these angles are neither complementary nor supplementary. Alright, so let's do the same thing down here. Tell whether the angles are complementary, supplementary, or neither. Well, let's start with 26 plus 64. 26 plus 64 have a sum of 90. Right, so those angles would be complementary. Alright, let's take a look at our next example. We have 44 plus 36, or 136. Oops, let's redo that. We have 44 plus 136. 136 plus 44. Right, that's going to be 180. So those two angles are supplementary because they have a sum. Alright, supplementary, let's do that a little neater. Right, they are supplementary. Right, because those two angles have a sum of 180 degrees. If we took a look at our last example, 70 plus 19, 70 plus 19, right, that's 89 degrees, right? So that would be an example of neither, because the sum is neither 90 nor 180 degrees. Okay, right, here's another set of examples. Right, notice that here we have a straight angle. Right, this angle here is a straight angle, and we split that straight angle into two angles. So those two angles have to have a sum of 180. So those two angles would be supplementary. All right, here we have a 60-degree angle and a 30-degree angle. Those two angles have a sum of 90, so those two angles would be complementary. Okay? 85 plus 90, right? That has a sum of 175, so that would be neither. Right? Neither complementary nor supplementary. Right? Let's see, 75 plus 15. 75 plus 15 is 90. Right? So 75 and 15 is 90, so those angles are complementary. Right, they are complementary angles because they have a sum of 90 degrees. Okay? Next examples, we want to tell whether the angles are complementary or supplementary, then we want to find the value of x. Well, we see a right angle symbol here, and we see these two angles, right, make up that right angle. So we know that those two angles have to be complementary, and it means that their sum is 90. So we want to write an equation in order to find x. So we write an equation that describes this situation. And this situation says that the sum of the angles, so that's 4x plus 36, has to be equal to 90 degrees. I have an equation here that I can solve, so I'm going to use my inverse operations. So we'd subtract 36 from both sides of that equation. That's going to be 0. We're left with 4x is going to be equal to, what's 90 minus 36? That's 54 degrees, or 54. And we divide that by 4. We divide that by 4. They cancel. And x is going to be equal to what? What's that? 4 into 54 goes what? 1 times 4 is 4. Subtract, we get 1. Bring down the 4. 4 times 3 is 12. Subtract, we get 2. So 13 and a half. Alright, so x is equal to 13 and a half, or 13.5 would be fine. Alright, let's look at our next example. We have a straight angle here, and these two angles, right, make up that straight angle. So those two angles have to have a sum of 180 degrees. So we want to write an equation that says that. So we write an equation that says x plus the x minus 4 has to be equal to 180 degrees. Right, we have like terms here because the variable's on the same side of the equal sign. So 1x and 1x is 2x minus 4. It's going to be equal to 180. Use our inverse operations to solve for x. So we're going to add 4 to both sides of that equation. Right, so we wind up with 2x is going to be equal to 184. And when we divide by 2 on both sides of the equation, we get x is equal to 92. Alright, we continue. Next group of problems. Right here they talk about drawing a pair of supplementary angles, so that one angle has a measure of 60 degrees. And if you take a look at how to use the protractor, right, we draw a vertical line here, or I'm sorry, a horizontal line. We draw an angle that's 60 degrees, and then the other angle has to be 180 minus 60. So these two angles would be supplementary. One angle would be 60, the other angle would actually have to be 180 minus 60, right, which would be 120 degrees. Okay, let's continue with some examples. Right, tell whether they're complementary or supplementary. Obviously we have a straight angle here, and these two angles make up that straight angle. So these would be supplementary angles. Supplementary. We want to find the value of x, so we want to write an equation that describes that relationship. We know that for supplementary angles, the sum has to be 180 degrees. So we write an equation that says that 4x plus 5 plus 41 has to be equal to 180. Right, 5 and 41 are like terms, so I combine them first. I recopy the 4x. 5 plus 41 is 46. That's equal to 180. I'm going to subtract 46 from both sides of that equation. That's going to be 0. So I'm left with 4x is going to be equal to 180 minus 46 is 134. And then we divide both sides by 4. Divide both sides by 4. They cancel. And x is equal to, what's that? 4 into 134. 4 into 134. 3 times 4 is 12. Subtract to get 1, bring down the 4. 4 times 3 is 12. Subtract to get 2. So x is going to be equal to 33 and a half. 33 and 1/2. Alright. This next example, we have two angles that make up that right angle. Right? So I know that they have to be complementary. And we want to write an equation that describes that relationship. Complementary angles have a sum of 90. So I'm going to take this angle and this angle. I want to take the x plus the 2x minus 3. And when I want to set that equal to 90, because the sum of those two angles has to be equal to 90. I have like terms because I have variables on the same side of the equation. So 1x and 2x is going to be 3x minus 3. is equal to 90. To solve that equation for x, we'd add 3 to both sides of that equation. Wind up with 3x. It's going to be equal to 93. Divide by 3, divide by 3. They cancel. X is going to be equal to 31. All right. A few more examples that will do. All right. Find the value of x. We see that these two angles make up a right angle, so those two angles have to be complementary. Complementary angles have a sum of 90, so we want to write an equation that says that. So we have 2x plus the 28 has to be equal to 90. We want to solve that equation by using the inverse operations. So we'd subtract 28 from both sides of the equation. Wind up with 2x is going to be equal to, what's that, 90 minus 28, that's going to be 62. Divide by 2, divide by 2. X is equal to 31. Right. Next example, the two angles are complementary or supplementary. Find the value of x. Well, if they're supplementary, it means that their sum has to be 180 degrees. So I want to write an equation that says that. So we have the 3x plus the 123 has to be equal to 180. Solve that for x. We're going to subtract 123 from both sides of the equation. Right, that's 0. 3x is going to be equal to, what's that, 180 minus 123. What's that, 60, so that's 57. Divide by 3. Divide by 3, they cancel. X is going to be equal to, what's that? X is going to be equal to 19. All right, a few more examples. Here we know that this is a straight angle, so these two angles plus 90 has to be equal to, right, 180. So I want to write an equation that says 1x plus 90 has to be equal to 180. Combine my like terms, 2x plus 90. It's going to be equal to 180. Subtract 90, right, that's 0. Wind up with 2x is going to be equal to 90. And then when we divide by 2 on both sides, x is going to be equal to 45. Alright. This next example, the picture shows a support brace for a gate. Find the value of x. The angle labeled 80 degrees and the angle labeled 10x are supplementary. Supplementary means they'd have to have a sum of 180. So I write that. 10x plus the 80 have to have a sum of 180. Right? To find x, we subtract 80 from both sides of the equation. We wind up with 10x is going to be equal to 100. When we divide by 10 on both sides of that equation, x is going to be equal to 10. Alright? Almost done here. These two angles are supplementary because they make up this straight angle here. So because they're supplementary, they have to have a sum of 180. So that's the equation we want to write. So we'd write 8x plus the 116 has to be equal to 180. Subtract 116 from both sides of the equation, that's 0. 8x is going to be equal to, what's that, 64. Divide by 8 on both sides of the equation. X is going to be equal to 8. Alright, so our last page of problems, so let's finish it up. Alright, to find the value of x, I have to know that those two angles have to be supplementary because they make up this straight angle here, and I want to write an equation that says that. So we'd write 3x plus 45 have to have a sum of 180. Subtract 45, that's 0. 3x is going to be equal to 180 minus 45 is going to be what, 35? 135, right? 135. That's correct. And then we divide by 3. They cancel. And that's going to be what? X is equal to, X is going to be equal to 45. Alright. Here we have two angles that make up this right angle. Those two angles have to be complementary, which means they'd have a sum of 90. So we have 2x plus 40 is equal to 90. We'd subtract 40 from both sides of the equation. We wind up with 2x is going to be equal to 50. And when we divide by 2 on both sides of that equation, x is going to be equal to 25. Right, this next example, these two angles are supplementary. They'd have to have a sum of 180. So I want to write an equation that says that. 6x plus 60 has to have a sum of 180. Subtract 60, subtract 60. Wind up with 6x is going to be equal to 120. Divide by 6, divide by 6. They cancel. X is going to be equal to, what's that? X is going to be equal to 20. Okay? A and B, or angle A and angle B, are complementary angles. The measure of angle B is 4x, and the measure of angle A is 50. What's the value of x? Well, because they're complementary, they'd have to have a sum of 90, so we write 4x plus the 50 has to have a sum of 90. Subtract 50 from both sides of that equation. We wind up with 4x is going to be equal to 40. And when we divide by 4 on both sides of the equation, x is going to be equal to 10. And then our last problem here, a skateboard ramp forms a 42-degree angle as shown, right, that's here. Find the value of x. Well, these two angles have to be supplementary because they form this straight angle here. So we write an equation for supplementary angles, right? 6x plus the 42 has to have a sum of 180. Subtract 42, subtract 42, right? That's 0. 6x is going to be equal to, what's that? 138. Divide by 6, divide by 6, they cancel. X is equal to, right, x is going to be equal to 28. Right, the takeaways here, guys, rather simple. Right, complementary angles have a sum of 90. So if two angles are complementary, we write an equation where we add the two angles together, and the sum has to be 90. When two angles are supplementary, their sum has to be 180 degrees. So we write and solve an equation of two angles that have a sum of 180. Okay, I hope that's been helpful, and we'll see you soon.